thanks everybody for joining us today. So I'm Sarah Irvine, General Manager of Sustainability and Corporate Affairs at Queenstown Airport. Very pleased to have you all joining us. I'm just going to go through a quick bit of housekeeping before handing over to our presenters today. So first things first, this webinar is being recorded and will be published so that people who aren't able to make it today can watch it at their leisure, or you guys can watch it again. We have a Q&A function enabled, so please submit your questions through that Q&A function. We have heard that on some browsers the Q&A function can be a little bit tricky, so we are also monitoring our community email account, which is community@queenstownairport.co.nz, so you can submit questions there as well. Obviously, all of the questions will be public, but just expecting normal courtesy and etiquette. But we'll allow those questions in, and you'll all be able to see those questions as they come up. Throughout the presentation, you'll be able to submit your questions, and once the presentation's finished, I'll facilitate those questions and ask the appropriate person to give you a response to your questions. So without further ado, I'll let you know who you're hearing from today. So we're very pleased to have Mayor Lewis. QLDC is obviously our majority shareholder, and Mayor Lewis is joining us today to make some introductory comments on Queenstown Airport's draft master plan. And then the speakers today, our CEO, Glenn Sowry, GM of Property Planning, Rachel Tregidga, and our Chief Operating Officer, Todd Grace. So we'll have an opportunity for all of your questions from those people after we've gone through this presentation. We'll also post in the comments a link to our website that has information and an animation that you can watch at your leisure, and links to how you can participate in the engagement. So with that, if I could hand over to you, Mayor Lewis, to make your introductory comments, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for attending the webinar. Obviously, this is a really important piece of work from the council's perspective, as this is probably the biggest asset we have a shareholding in, or it's the only asset we really do have a shareholding in the district. And I know the councillors are very interested and very well invested in what happens with our airport. This master plan has come from working with our destination management plan, and that's been in partnership with us, as well as Lake Wanaka Tourism and Destination Queenstown. Just the basis of this master plan, the forecasted numbers are 3.2% compounding annual growth, or compounding annual growth rate. And from a council perspective, if we look back at our 2021 10-year plan, our average day population assumptions are 5.4, and our peak daily population assumptions are 3.5. So we see here a plan that is under our own estimations, which I think shows that this airport is really listening to the community, really taking on concerns about growth, and actually trying to turn that dial into a regenerative tourism space we're trying to get to, and where this community is driving this council to get to. So I really congratulate the airport in driving that future focus. The investment in the airport is more about our community having pride in this airport. It's about making sure it's convenient, accessible, and for most of our visitors, it's the front door to this district and our region. And I think our welcoming mat has to be welcoming and actually tells the story of what this district is about. So a lot of this investment is to do with that, and I'd really like to hear from you all about what this airport can do to enhance our own pride and our own important asset for us, as well as how you'd like to see that develop into the future. Now, obviously, this is important to us as a council, and we're really keen to get as much feedback and as much commentary and submissions as we possibly can from our community. So please listen hard, ask those questions, and get onto our QLDC website on the Let's Talk program. That's probably one of the ways you can give that feedback to us, because as an organisation ourselves, we're really interested to hear from that. And that's all I've got to say. So I'm just going to hand it over to our Chief Executive of QAC, Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor Lewis, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar this afternoon. So, firstly, what is a master plan? So, it by definition is a long-dated plan looking at infrastructure and what the airport physically needs to look like for the next decade and decades beyond that. A really important point to note is that the master plan is essentially a physical representation of our 10-year strategic plan that we launched last year. A key feature of that 10-year strategic plan was the decision that QAC made in response to community feedback that our commitment to operate within our existing noise boundaries for the next decade. So this master plan reflects that. As Mayor Lewis said in his introduction, and I'll comment on shortly, there is modest growth that's going to occur over the next decade, and this master plan addresses that through staged investment in infrastructure to ensure that we have an efficient, safe, sustainable airport that meets the needs of our community, that enables efficient, affordable air links into and out of the district, and that is a gateway, as Mayor Lewis said, that we can all be proud of as our front door. It's important to note, however, that over half of all visitors to the QLDC region, in fact, come by road. So whilst Queenstown Airport is an incredibly important gateway and front door to the region, we are not the exclusive source of travel in and out of the region. So we'll share with you today some images that show the master plan out to 2032. And also what we're protecting for in terms of infrastructure and space within the airport precinct beyond 2032, with a particular emphasis on decarbonisation of aviation. So making sure that we have the space available to be able to introduce hydrogen generation and fueling, electrified aviation, which we know is coming this decade. The master plan also guides how infrastructure and development will occur over time. And a really critical part is to make sure that it's delivered when and where it is needed, so that we don't invest in advance of its need, but we also understand when we're likely to need it and have a plan to achieve that. So if we move on to the next slide. So this gives you a quick snapshot of what is changing between today and 2032. As Mayor Lewis said, in our 10-year strategic plan, we've forecast passenger numbers to increase to 3.2 million from 2.4 today. And bear in mind that is 2.4 million translates to 1.2 million in each direction. And that translates to just over 3% of growth per annum. Scheduled aircraft movements are scheduled to increase by 23%, and you'll notice that that's less than the passenger numbers, and that's principally due to the introduction of the new Airbus A321neo aircraft, which are 217-seat aircraft, so 27% more seats than an A320. They're quieter than an existing A320, and they are lower absolute emissions. And so when you translate that onto a per passenger basis, they're considerably more efficient, and they are noticeably quieter when flying in and out of the airport. Non-scheduled movements is essentially the label we give to helicopters, fixed wing general aviation, so the likes of the Milford flights, corporate jets when they come in and out of the airport, and itinerant traffic. And by itinerant, we mean typically general aviation who are visiting the airport. That's forecast to grow by around 19% over the next decade. The terminal sees a modest increase in its footprint of 15%. And we're very focused on ensuring that we do that as cost effectively as possible, preserving as much of the terminal as we can to ensure that we do not spend more than we need to. But at the same time, we do have investment to make to improve the seismic resilience of the terminal. And we think there's an opportunity to do a better job in terms of the way passengers flow through the aircraft to make it a more enjoyable experience. So with that, I'll hand over to Rachel, who'll talk through some of the foundational considerations that we've applied in developing this draft master plan.
Thank you, Glenn. So we just thought we'd spend a couple of minutes talking about the different considerations we've taken into account of as we've developed the layouts. Just as a introduction, we've consulted extensively with some of our key stakeholders at the airport, so people like CAA, Airways, including our local air traffic controllers, the general aviation operators, and all of the airlines that fly in here. And as you'd expect, that's on the more technical aspects of the plans, the draft plans, with a particular focus on safety and regulatory and operational features. So the bullet points that we've got here on this slide are not necessarily in any particular order. However, it's fair to say that safety and regulatory compliance, which consists of both CAA or Civil Aviation Authority and RMA considerations, are mandatory and underpin all the layout considerations. Regarding sustainability and decarbonisation, we have some really key goals and focuses that we are trying to achieve through the development of this airport. So the way the aircraft access the airport and move around the airfield is really, really critical to achieving those goals. The changes that we're proposing inside the terminal allow us to achieve sustainability goals. And as Glenn just mentioned, the decision to utilise as much infrastructure as possible that's already existing means that we can minimise waste and embedded carbon. In addition, the location of smaller fixed-wing aviation, as well as helicopters, which are the two primary noise sources for the airport, aside from the scheduled aviation. We have to think about where they're located so that we can be very confident that we stay within our noise boundaries as we've committed to do so for the next 10 years. So the locations that we're showing on the draft plan have been modelled, and we are confident that we can stay within that commitment. With a complex airfield as well, we need to ensure that we have everything in the right place and the right space for them. And that's to minimise conflict and make sure that things can work together as effectively and efficiently as possible. Also, what happens on the ground has an impact on how things work in the air. So considering ground and 2D layout in the 3D, so in the airspace, is also really, really important. And finally, how much does it all cost, and is it affordable? And that's affordable from for QAC, for airlines, and for other airport users like the GA community. So with that, I think we'll head on into the layout plans. So I'll hand over to you, Todd.
Thanks, Rachel. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is where things do get quite interesting, because a picture really does paint 1,000 words, and the view of the master plan actually brings to life a lot of the work that Rachel has been describing, that the team have been doing, and also incorporates some of the feedback and the technical advice we have been receiving over the last number of months. So what I want to do, I'm not going to go through every single dot point here. I want to call out the main features of the master plan, because the plan is a very good blend of, future forward-looking what we believe we should be doing here at Queenstown, but also it continues on what a natural evolution of the airport of Queenstown size should be, with investment in infrastructure. And clearly over the last 3 to 4 years, Some of those decisions have been very hard to take as we've lived through the uncertainty of COVID. But as we come out the back side of that, there's some work here to do with both regulatory compliance as well as safety that is natural for us to consider and incorporate into our plan. So I'm going to start off by picking up on the general aviation community. And if you're familiar with Queenstown and Queenstown Airport, on the bottom left-hand corner of the plan where Lucas Place is, that has been historic and the current home of general aviation at Queenstown Airport. And so we have a mixture of commercial fixed wing operators, commercial helicopter operators, as well as private itinerant operators on a smaller scale do come and go from this area. Over time, the airport has grown in and around this area, and the frequency of the general aviation operators has grown since the inception of the airport. Best practice for general aviation precincts is for the fixed wing and the helicopter operators to operate in separate areas because they are quite different types of traffic. And we want to improve upon both the operational efficiencies that we have today, as well as some of the safety aspects that we have today of those operators from their current location. So the plan proposes moving the helicopter operations onto the northern side of the runway into the area nominated by number 6. The reason for helicopters being on the northern side of the airfield is by far and away the majority of helicopter operations lift and then head north on their tracks. And what this does is it prevents helicopters from negotiating their way out of the Lucas Place area, hovering above active taxiways and having to cross the centre line of the runway in order to exit the airfield. And so some of the research we've done demonstrates that between 70 to 80% of all helicopter movements move north. So it's a far more intuitive and it's a far more efficient and safer way for the helicopters to leave the aerodrome and also access the aerodrome. What that means for fixed wing is that they naturally then move on to the southern side of the aerodrome into the area marked by number 5. And so that's where the operators like Glenorchy Air and Air Milford, True South, Milford Flights, that's the area that they would occupy in that space there. What this allows is for those operators to have greater access and improved access to the main runway, which is the 0523 runway that runs across the airfield. We do propose retaining the crosswind runway, which is marked number 2 on the plan. But we do have an obligation to continue to look at safety and improve safety at the airfield. And one of the key areas which we will be reducing is the amount of times that aircraft, both fixed wing and helicopter operators, cross the main runway, because the intersecting runway does contain some risk. And so it's our job as an airfield operator to ensure that we continue to develop infrastructure that reduces operational risk for our operators and for their customers. So the proposal will allow fixed wing operators to use the main runway and operate it in a consistent way with the rest of the fixed wing aircraft, and remove the amount of times that the fixed wing operators need to cross the main runway or the intersecting runway, and reduce the potential for conflicts on the main runway. To enable that and to increase the efficiency of the main runway, we are proposing to build a heavy taxiway on the southern side of the runway, and that's marked by number 3. And so that taxiway goes in front of the general aviation precinct to allow them efficient access and access to the main runway, and it has that benefit for the fixed wing community. It also supports both feedback that we have had from the commercial operators, as well as some of our sustainability goals, which is to reduce the amount of delays that we have at Queenstown Airport, both on the ground as well as in the air. And some of the challenges that we face with the main runway without a taxiway is that the throughput of the runway is significantly constrained because the aircraft upon landing have to go right to the end of the runway, turn around, and then taxi all the way back down the runway upon landing, and then they do the opposite on departure. This has the effect of occupying the runway, and when the runway is occupied by an aircraft, it means that nothing else can come and go at that same time. And that has the effect of slowing down the rate that traffic can come into the airfield, and it causes congestion. And the way that this congestion shows up is an aircraft will either be delayed on the ground, and while it's delayed on the ground, often that is occurring while the aircraft is waiting to depart with engines running. And this can sometimes be 10, 15, 20, up to half an hour that the aircraft may be held on the ground waiting for a departure slot. Or even worse, this often occurs when the aircraft is airborne. And it's not uncommon coming into Queenstown Airport that airlines are held, or aircraft are held en route over Wanaka or Lake Hawea, or coming in from the Trans-Tasman sectors over Milford Sound and over Fiordland. And they may be orbiting for some periods of time, waiting to get sequenced into Queenstown. So we believe that both from a safety and also from an efficiency perspective, the addition of a heavy taxiway at Queenstown solves a number of our problems with respect to throughput of the runway and greater access and more efficient access into the aerodrome. As we move, and just staying on the runway, 2 points we'd like to also call out, marked at either end of the runway through number 4, is a safety feature. It's shown as EMAS, which stands for Engineered Material Arrestor System. And what this is a relatively new piece of technology that has come out of Europe and North America, and it's specifically designed for airports with shorter runways and with hazards at both ends of the runway. And as we know at Queenstown, on the lake end, we have State Highway 6 and a drop at the end of the runway down onto State Highway 6. And on the Shotover end, we have exactly the same. And so what we want to be able to protect for is in the unlikely event that you have an aircraft overrun, and that means that an aircraft that has landed and that has not been able to stop completely within the confines of the runway. This material is a bit like a golfer's sand trap. It means that if an aircraft went into it and still going at speed, the aircraft would rapidly come to a halt within the confines of the EMAS system. And this is a safety feature that we've been in conversation with both airlines as well as our regulator about putting into Queenstown as an additional safety benefit for the airfield. I just want to move on to the terminal and the terminal precincts. We are proposing one additional parking stand in the area marked number 9. This allows us to have greater flexibility, particularly when an aircraft has a technical problem, and we have had incidents here at Queenstown of aircraft not being able to land because we have not had a gate available for them. So what it allows us to be able to do is have greater resilience in the airfield, and it does allow us to fit one more aircraft in to support some modest growth at the airfield. The terminal continues on its current access and heads south, and that's marked by the box number 10. As Glenn mentioned earlier in the piece, we do have some work to do in the terminal because of the various stages of the terminal development over the years. Some of the earlier stages, we are going to need to come back and do some seismic work to upgrade the terminal. And some of that work will be really invasive, and we'll have a couple of choices to make down the track about whether that requires some fairly heavy remediation work, or whether simply that requires removing parts of the building and then rebuilding it. Either way, before that we can embark on that work, we are going to need to build some additional headroom or some additional capacity in the terminal so that we can relocate services out of the area that we're going to have to remediate and fix up. And so the proposal is to do that by developing the terminal in a direction southwards towards Tex-Smith Lane and building some additional capacity in that location so we can move the parts of the terminal out into that area that we're going to have to come back and remediate and fix. And then by the time that we have completed that and effectively stitched the building back up together again, that additional footprint will provide us, will allow us to provide a far greater customer experience than what we do today. And we know that in some days and at certain times of the day, the terminal does get pretty tight. And we want to, as Mayor Lewis said, we want to make the airport a wonderful gateway into the district and a really great experience for visitors as well as members of the community when they travel through the airport. Then moving outside of the terminal, you can see some modest changes or some slight changes to the to what we call the landside precinct, which is where the rental cars and the public car parking is, but with an added feature or an added focus, should I say, in the box labelled number 17, which is a dedicated public transport area. Alongside the council, we are keen to support and enable a mode shift so people are not so reliant on private motor vehicles moving to and from the airport. So the development of the terminal southwards provides the opportunity to also develop out a public transport precinct outside the new part of the terminal. We'll also be doing some minor changes to the rental car locations. The main drop-off area will remain on the northern side of the terminal, and that is marked number 19. And so customers, as they come into the airport, will drop off their car in that location, which is adjacent to where check-in is, to make the journey from the vehicle into the terminal more simple and more intuitive. And then the pickup area when customers and travellers arrive into the airport through the terminal, because the new arrivals area will be on the southern side of the terminal, that the rental car pickup area will be moving to the area labelled number 20 on the box. So what we believe in this proposal is that it'll be a far more efficient way of getting to and from the terminal through either private motor vehicle, through a rental car, or through public transport, and to make those journeys to and from the terminal easier, more efficient, and far more intuitive than what we have today. And then just finally, there's a couple of smaller areas that we just want to point out. On the far right-hand end of the area, we talked previously about supporting future technologies, and I think Rachel will build this out a little bit more on the next slide as we start to look beyond 2032. But we're setting aside space on our land areas for particularly areas of sustainable aviation support. And so we know that future fuels or future aircraft technology are going to be different than what we have today. And so we're setting aside land to allocate towards what the requirements for airlines or for aviation or for fuel sources will look like in the future, and they're shown out there on the right-hand side of the airfield. So that's a picture of what gets us through to 2032. I'm just going to hand back to Rachel now, and Rachel can discuss what potentially the plan beyond 2032 might look like.
Thanks, Todd. As has already been discussed, we're preserving space beyond 2032 for incremental activity. And I really just want to make the point that there's no assumptions that the airport will grow beyond 2032, but we believe it's really prudent as a long-term infrastructure owner that we look at preserving space for future needs should they arise. So I'll start back in about what we're preserving in the terminal and land transport areas. So Todd talked about the proposed expansion to the terminal number 10. We're also have preserved space for the addition of a finger pier, which could access the additional aircraft stands as well if they were required into the future. In the land transport area, that's a flexible space that we've allowed for there for additional all modes of transport. So that's everything from shuttles to public transport, with a real focus on prioritising pedestrian and cycling. We're proposing a cycling hub that would provide end-of-trip facilities, parking, bicycle storage, and that area could also be expanded beyond 2032, but depending on the pickup for that area. There's additional space allowed for in that whole transport area, and I think that remains to be seen exactly how that's used, but with the focus on that mode shift and providing better legibility and access to different areas of Frankton Flats. One of the key features we've also preserved is what we have called a green link. So that's by number 27. So that would give direct access for pedestrians and cycles from the terminal, in particular from the arrivals and forecourt area, down across Lucas Place, over State Highway 6, and connecting up with a proposed ferry jetty on Lake Whakatipu, and also direct access to the cycle trails. So that requires some work with QLDC and Waka Kotahi and ORC and so on. So that's something that we have got a real vision for achieving, but we realise that it needs a little bit more work to get it to that point. The other things that I wanted to talk about are you can see that a lot of the area for expansion or preserved space is in the Southern Aviation Precinct, or Lot 6 as it's sometimes called. So there is areas as for relocated activities, so things airport emergency services are intending to move in the first 10 years, but there's provision for airline catering to be relocated, our fuel farm to also be relocated if that's needed. So just touching on the sustainable aviation and what we are looking into, Air New Zealand have talked about their first commercial electric aircraft prototype being available in 2026, which is just around the corner. So we want to be in a position where we can accommodate and encourage that aircraft and other aircraft following to come to Queenstown Airport. So we've provided a space for an electric aircraft precinct, and for space for that to also increase over time as that technology evolves. In addition, the event of hydrogen aircraft is probably at least a decade away, but we want to preserve the space for either storage or for generation of hydrogen, and are also looking to see how we could support the community with heavy transport, tourism buses, potentially commuter buses as well, to potentially share that facility with us. In addition, we're looking at a provision for space in the northern area, which is marked by 25 for eVTOL, which is electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, which tends to be the passenger 1 or 2 person aircraft. And I think that's probably covers most of the beyond 2032. So I'll hand back to you, Glenn.
Okay, thanks, Rachel and Todd. So how's it all going to be paid for? We've forecast that this total project will cost in the region of $350 million, which will be phased over the next decade. We will develop and build infrastructure in a phased manner. Even if we wanted to do all of this quickly, the infrastructure and capacity limitations that exist nationally, let alone regionally, would limit our ability to go too fast. So we will look at, in the event that the master plan is approved, or a version of it, that we would look to start investing in staging this development. The likely first moves would be the like of relocating the helicopters to the north, and a number of airfield investments and some in the terminal. We'll be looking at gateways, so that before we make an investment in any aspect of the master plan, which is ultimately a collation of a whole lot of projects, they'll all be subject to business case and board approval before we progress. And of course, we'll be signalling that strongly to our shareholder through our annual statement of intent to ensure that we remain in sync. So with that, we think that this is a prudent plan. To put things into perspective, Auckland Airport reasonably announced the first phase of their new master plan, which is the building of a new domestic terminal. The existing domestic terminal in Auckland is now pretty old, as we all know. So they're looking to create a new terminal connected to the international terminal, same size in capacity or a fraction bigger than the existing one. And the forecast cost of that is $3.9 billion with a B. In Australia, if we look at the West Sydney Airport, that's recently is finalising construction. That is costing over 6 billion Australian dollars. So we think this is cost effective. We're being very careful to make sure that we build something that is fit for purpose, cost effective, that airlines and travellers can afford, and that's brought on as and when it is required. So that's a very critical part of this financial view. The other aspect, which is of course very important, is that we're able to continue to pay a dividend to our shareholders, and particularly our majority shareholder QLDC, throughout this period of investment and development. This year in financial 23, which finishes at the end of June, we're on target to deliver our shareholders a record ever dividend payment from the airport, which is of course very important. So we are modelling that we'll be able to continue to pay that dividend as we progress through this development program. So what I'll do now is pass on to Sarah Irvine, who will take you through the consultation process and where to from here.
Thanks very much, Glenn. I'll just quickly cover off. We've got 2 slides just to let you know about what other opportunities there are to engage with us on in this consultation process. And please send through your questions. We've got a couple coming in, which I'll get to in just a moment. If you're also watching the recording of this, you can still send questions to that community email address I mentioned earlier, community@queenstownairport.co.nz. I also mentioned at the start, but we've had a few people join us since then, that on some browsers the Q&A function doesn't work so well. So please send any questions you have live. We're monitoring that live now too. So as you can see on the screen here, we've got a number of different ways for people to be involved in this consultation we're doing in partnership with QLDC, and all of the information, all the detailed information is on the Queenstown Airport website, and the responses and submissions, we'd invite you to send them through to the Let's Talk platform. So if you look at QLDC's Let's Talk platform, that's easy to find. And this is just a slide that tells you the consultation, in-person consultation opportunities that we have. So it's relatively informal with a lot of information there available at places hopefully close to where you are. And you're very welcome to come along and join us there, where we'll have people from the airport to answer questions and take you through the plan in more detail. So now if we move to the questions, I'll just use people's first names with the questions that are coming in. The first one that we have here relates to funding, so it links to that last slide quite nicely. Are increases in charges to airlines budgeted to fund a portion of the plan? If so, how much is that expected to add to each passenger's flight cost if passed on by the airlines? Glenn, if I can pass that to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, the way that this development's funded is we consult with airline customers to make sure that they are comfortable with the investment that we're proposing to make. The initial discussions that we've had with them is that they are very comfortable with what we're proposing and the quantum that we're talking about. So that's a very important first step. Secondly, yes, the cost of this infrastructure does get passed on to airlines through aeronautical charges. That is how this development is funded. We get to earn revenue off of this infrastructure once it is operable and being used by our customers. So at that point, those aeronautical charges do increase. To give you an idea of the quantum, each customer passenger flying through Queenstown Airport presently on a domestic flight pays approximately $10, just over $10 per passenger when you travel through is what it costs today. Queenstown is one of the cheaper airports for airlines to operate into in New Zealand. And certainly when we benchmark in Australia, it's very affordable. With the increased cost that will be attributed to aeronautical charging, that $10 will increase, but it will be in the region of single digits, we forecast. So Queenstown will still remain an affordable and competitive airport for airlines to operate in and out of.
Thanks, Glenn. This is a quick, easy one to answer. Will the airport's hours of operation change as part of the plan?
Short answer is no.
Do you want to provide a bit more clarity on the 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. distinction?
Sure. So currently our designated hours of operation are 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. We have since COVID, coming out of COVID, we have applied a voluntary additional limitation on aircraft operations to 7 a.m. So presently there are no commercial flights in or out of Queenstown Airport before 7 a.m. and the last flight remains 10 p.m. Wheels need to be up or on the ground by 10 p.m. and it's not possible to arrive or depart after that time. We do not anticipate that will change.
So we've got a question here from a member of our airport community. With the airport's community growing and post-COVID coming back, more staff working across the airport campus, will the draft master plan include amenities such as showers, toilets and locker space for all staff working at the airport?
Yeah, I think, it's important to note that Queenstown Airport's an incredibly significant employer or enabler of employment here. So over 700 people work at the airport, be that in general aviation, with border agencies, with retail, with airlines, ground handlers, the list goes on. So we will be looking at, we know that the services and the infrastructure that we have in the terminal at the moment are not at the standard that we would like, and that's reflective of the destination. If we're going to encourage and promote active travel, so people to cycle to work and the like, then yes, we absolutely will look at end of journey facilities so that people are going to be able to shower and get ready to come to work.
We've got a question that came in before the webinar started with regard to the parallel taxiway. I've noted that question, but I think that was quite comprehensively answered in the presentation. For the person who asked that question, if you wanted any more information, please email community and we'll provide more detail on that one. There is a question here with regard to freight. What provision is there for freight in the draft master plan?
So currently we do have the ability to handle freight out of Queenstown Airport, and reasonably regularly we'll carry things like crayfish out of Fiordland, which gets shipped up to Auckland or Christchurch and then exported typically into Asia or North America. So we will continue to make freight logistic facilities available adjacent to the baggage hall. And we have ample space available to us adjacent to the current baggage makeup hall, where we can expand for freight facilities in the future as and when that's required. But we do want to make sure we can continue to support freight services in and out of Queenstown, where airlines are able to accommodate and carry that.
Thanks, Glenn. There's a question here about car parks. Are you planning more car parks and for EV charging? I think that relates potentially to rental cars and private cars.
Yeah. So Our car parks here in Queenstown are used exclusively by local residents. So a visitor coming to the region typically doesn't park at the airport. So we want to make sure that we continue through on airport parking and also with our park and ride facility to continue to provide affordable and convenient car parking for those people for whom it's their choice. We do, however, want to continue to promote alternative transport options to the airport, particularly public transport that we were talking about, Rachel and Todd were talking about earlier. And we've put, I might call it a toe in the water with EV charging. We have 6 EV chargers in prime spots in our car park that are able to be used free of charge by people with EVs parking here at Queenstown Airport. We are going to be looking to grow that over time as demand dictates, and certainly with our rental car operators, we're going to be actively working with them in promoting and encouraging fleet transitions to EVs in the rental car fleet here in Queenstown.
Thank you. I've just got a few questions coming in from Ashley. So the first one relates to the air noise boundaries and modelling. When were the existing noise boundaries modelled and when will they be remodelled? So potentially that relates to any noise modelling work that's been done connected to the draft master plan, I think.
Rachel, can I invite you to answer that, please?
Yeah. So we have a regular program of noise monitoring and modelling. So we do annual contour modelling to ensure that we stay within our noise boundaries and we are compliant with those. For the master plan specifically, we have modelled the locations that we're proposing for helis, for fixed wing and for scheduled aircraft. And can confirm that those locations and the projected aircraft movements associated with those will stay within the final noise boundaries that we have in the district plan.
Thanks, Rachel. There's another question here. Have airlines that fly to Queenstown committed to buying more A320neo planes or A320 or similar? I'm assuming that relates to lower emissions and quieter aircraft.
Todd, would you like to answer that one?
Short answer is yes. We know we've been talking to all of the airlines that currently operate here. So Air New Zealand do have a well-documented plan for swapping out their A320 fleet and have committed to additional purchases of A320neo aircraft as well as A321neo aircraft. And I think everybody that is in and around Queenstown have all commented that they have a significantly quieter noise profile than the A320ceo aircraft as well as the 737. We also know that Qantas have recently placed a very large order with Airbus for neo type aircraft technology, and we also know that Virgin has placed an order for 737 MAX technology, which is a similar type of engine with similar types of noise profiles and reduced noise profile to what the Airbus neo aircraft does. So we know that the customers that operate in and out, or the airlines that operate in and out of Queenstown, have all made commitments to neo aircraft technology. And what we will be doing as an airport will be talking with those airlines about how we incentivize or prioritize them sending those aircraft to Queenstown, whether it gives them greater access to the airfield, whether it gives them better cost benefits of coming into Queenstown. But we believe it's the right thing to do to encourage those airlines to operate those aircraft in and out of Queenstown.
Thanks, Todd. Now there's a question here from Mark. Will you publish live all questions and answers asked in sessions with the community?
Well, certainly today we are, and this is available online and anyone will be able to come in and listen and observe lately after the fact. All of the feedback that we get through Let's Talk will be made available to council. So we're planning to be, we're attempting to be completely transparent here. I'd like to think is the short answer.
We've also got a FAQs page on our website, and so we can obviously update that regularly, and we're doing that as questions come in when there's common themes. So that's on our Queenstown Airport website there. Okay, there's a question here regarding to demand. Have we done any work on the impact of not meeting demand socially, environmentally, and economically to the district and wider region? So that's from Ashley.
So when we developed the 10-year strategic plan, we did a lot of work to understand and forecast what we believe demand was going to be for air travel in and out of the region. To put things into perspective, the catchment for Queenstown Airport being Queenstown Lakes District Council area, so Wanaka, Upper Clutha, Wakatipi Basin, Central Otago, and down into parts of Southland such as Te Anau, is forecast to be a bit over 100,000 people in 2045. That's the same size as Nelson, Tasman. So the demand for travel from the local community is absolutely catered for by Queenstown Airport into the future. What we heard very clearly, and it's also reflected in the new Travel to a Thriving Future Destination Management Plan recently published by Destination Queenstown and Lake Wanaka Tourism, is that there is an appetite for a certain amount of visitor economy, tourism. When Queenstown Airport in 2018 sought to significantly increase passenger volumes through an expansion of the noise boundaries, there was, as many people on this call know, strong pushback. So we believe that we've got the balance right between what the community supports and thinks is appropriate for the district and enables a strong and thriving economy, and also creates the social linkages for people to be able to connect with friends and family, do business elsewhere around the country and internationally. So we believe we've listened to, responded to, and reflected the community's aspirations about what they're prepared to accept and they think is appropriate for the region.
Thanks, Glenn. So we've got just a few more minutes left. We can stay on a little bit longer if more questions come in. But if you have a burning question, put it in the Q&A or send us an email now to community@queenstownairport.co.nz. A question that came in prior to the webinar starting relates to Wanaka Airport and our management of Wanaka Airport. Basically, the question says, what about Wanaka Airport? So I'm assuming that means in relation to master planning.
Yeah, and we're being asked that question a lot as we go through this process. This master plan, this draft master plan, relates specifically to Queenstown Airport, and it does not reference or relate to Wanaka Airport. Wanaka Airport is 100% owned by Queenstown Lakes District Council. Queenstown Airport operates under a management services agreement, the day-to-day operations of Wanaka Airport on behalf of QLDC as the owner. Future decisions around what development or services are appropriate to operate into Wanaka Airport will be for QLDC to make in consultation with the Wanaka community. It's fair to say that I'm hearing fairly regularly that there is interest in turboprop services into Wanaka. They currently exist. Sounds Air today operates twice daily flights from Wanaka to Christchurch, which are very well patronised. And so, you know, there's potentially opportunity for further services there with turboprop aircraft. But as mentioned earlier, that's a decision for QLDC and the Wanaka community to make.
Thanks, Glenn. I think I'll just double check. Have we got any more questions in right now? Okay, well, that covers all the questions. Glenn or Todd or Rachel, is there anything else that anyone wanted to add before we wrap up? No?
No, I think that's it. Thanks, Sarah.
Cool.
Just
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Encourage
Sorry, go.
everyone to please put their feedback in on the Let's Talk program. We want to hear from as many people as possible, and hope to see you around and about in our drop-in sessions, pop-up sessions.
Thanks, Rachel. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. We will be sharing the Q&A and the whole presentation live, and questions can still come in through all those avenues we talked about before. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you very much, Mayor Lewis, for joining us today. And that's it. I'll close it off.